So the most important thing to think about when you're starting to look at cannabis in low doses, by far the most important thing of anything that I've talked about at all in this series, is methods of administration. So this is a important topic because there's a lot of misunderstanding and there's a lot of confusion around the different types of ways to consume cannabis. So I plan to describe those ways in some detail here. And of course, if anything is confusing at any time, this is always something that you can seek additional information on. It's very important to understand the methods of administration before you choose to consume cannabis so that you understand how the cannabis is going to interact with your body. So there are a few different types of methods of administration. I'm going to keep this discussion pretty general and pretty high level in terms of three main categories. The first is actually smoking or inhaling the cannabis. I'll describe that in more detail in a minute. The second way to consume cannabis is some type of oral administration. And the third way to consume cannabis is some type of topical administration. And by topical, I mean rubbing something on your skin. In terms of low dosing, the two areas to focus on are the inhalation method and the oral administration method. So let's first talk about the inhalation method of consuming cannabis. Generally speaking, there are two ways to inhale cannabis. Now, for those of you who have never visited a dispensary, maybe you've never even seen a cannabis plant, let me describe for you how this works. So the cannabis plant grows from the ground. So Botany 101, cannabis grows from the ground, shoots off flowers, and then those flowers contain the sort of active ingredients, if you will, the cannabinoids, the terpenes, the flavonoids, the things that we've talked about earlier in the series. You take the flower off the plant just like you would pick a flower from your garden. And method number one is smoke that flower. So you can smoke that flower in a variety of ways. You could take the flower and you could roll it up in some type of cigarette looking thing. These are typically called joints. And you literally would light it like you would light a cigarette and you would inhale the cannabis. Now, the second way to inhale cannabis is some type of vaporizing method. And vaporizing methods, there's lots of different, vaporizing methods of administration. This is a self-contained disposable vape pen. It doesn't require any kind of charging or any kind of technical prowess. Basically, this is what you buy from the dispensary. And what's contained in here is some type of extract from the cannabis plant. Now, there are lots of different ways to extract cannabinoids from the cannabis plant, and I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail. But when you take the flower and you extract the cannabinoids from the cannabis plant, you can essentially extract one cannabinoid. Let's say you want to just extract THC, and that's called the THC isolate. That isolate could be in your oil. Now, there's also an extraction method that is more considered to be more whole plant, where they're trying to extract as many of the cannabinoids as possible from the flower, including the terpenes, the flavonoids, and all of those things are included in the oil simply by taking this mouthpiece and inhaling like you would inhale, a breath of air. You administer the cannabis through your lung system and it goes into your bloodstream. Now, when you're talking about smoking or inhaling cannabis, these are important forms of administration because it's the most popular type of administration, and it's probably what you've seen or heard about. It's very fast acting. So because the extract or the cannabinoids are coming into your bloodstream, if you were to look at an absorption curve, again, not to get too technical, but if you smoke or inhale cannabis, you're going to go shoot up real quick. It takes about 9 minutes to feel the full effects if you're smoking flower, and about 17 minutes to feel the full effects if you're vaporizing cannabis. So if you were to look at that absorption curve, you're going to shoot up really quickly. And for those of you looking at the video, I'm kind of making a little hand diagram of shooting up. There's a real sharp curve, It lasts about 60 minutes, and then you come kind of dramatically back down. So if you're choosing to administer cannabis in the form of smoking or inhalation, you're going to need to smoke some, have your effects, smoke some more, have your effects, smoke some. You get the idea. So this is something that is somewhat difficult. You can probably just tell by the way that I'm describing this. It's a little bit difficult to control the dose. It's not highly discreet. It is portable, but again, it's not going to be something that if you're looking at ways of consuming cannabis that are more controlled, more discreet, it's probably not the best method for you. However, two big advantages of these forms of administration are that they are very fast acting and that they are also relatively inexpensive. So the cheapest way to consume cannabis by far is to smoke the flower of the plant in the form of a joint or some type of pipe, etc. But that's also going to expose you to combustion risk associated with, lighting the flower. That's still a real thing. So while cannabis itself has got great effects in terms of, indications and medical applications, etc., combusting, the actual flower does produce carcinogens. So that's an important thing to consider. Although a lot of the research suggests that, relatively speaking, although there are those combustion effects, it's counteracted by something within the cannabis flower to prevent those deleterious effects. So, for example, there's no data associating cannabis consumption, flower consumption, smoking the flower of the plant with the development of cancer, for example. So that's just an interesting data point, especially relative to a consumption of tobacco, for example. So the second form of administration, and this is the one that I think is really important in the context of low dosing, is the oral administration of cannabis. So, and again, speaking very broadly, high level, generally speaking, the oral form of administration is any time you open your mouth and you put a cannabis product in your mouth. Now, this includes edible products that you might have heard a lot of the hype around, pot brownies or, gummy bears or, little cookies that you can take. Now, these is similar to the vaporization of cannabis oil, just like we were talking about extraction and extraction methodology. Those same oils, that's what they do with the infusion of the edibles, right? So that kind of makes sense. You can think of yourself making a batch of brownies and, throwing some extracted cannabis oil into this brownie mixture, and there you have it. So there are other types of methods of administration, oral administration, that you don't really hear about. And this is why I'm kind of here with you today, right? In the context of low down and low dosing, there are methods of administration that read a little bit more medical, right? So tinctures, right? Where you take a dropper of cannabis extraction. It could be an isolate of one particular cannabinoid. I know we've talked previously about CBD, for example. It could be a CBD only extraction, or it could be more of the whole plant extraction, which is going to afford you all of the cannabinoids as well as the terpenes and the flavonoids. Now, these are just, imagine a little medicine bottle. We don't have one here today, but imagine a little medicine bottle with a little dropper that you just, pick up and you just drop it under your tongue. That's considered a sublingual administration, and I'll get into that a little bit relative to some of the edible forms of administration in a minute. But broadly speaking, this category of oral administration is really good for a few reasons. Number one, when you administer the cannabis orally, it actually goes through a different system within your body, right? So if you're smoking it, just like you would smoke tobacco, etc., it goes into your bloodstream very, very fast, right? Because it's going through your lungs and it's being administered in your bloodstream. Now, if you ingest cannabis through an oral form of administration, it's going to be largely processed by your liver. Now, two important things about this liver process. One, it's not instant. So this is, you've probably heard stories of edibles gone awry. Maureen Dow back in 2014, she was a columnist for the New York Times. She went to Colorado. She had a really, really awful experience. She was essentially kind of blogging about this in real time. It was a very dramatic, bad situation because she was consuming cannabis and orally, and it takes a while. It can take up to 90 minutes to feel the full effects of administering cannabis in an oral form of administration. And the way that it's processed is slightly different than that smoking or inhalation method that you're going to get where you're looking at the flower or vaporizing an oil, right? So the first thing is it's processed by your liver and it's going to take a while. Okay, so just make a note of that. The second thing that's really important is that once that process happens, it's a gradual process. So if you were seeing me on the video here, it's a much more steady curve, right? That's going up very slowly. So not those sharp peaks and valleys that you get from smoking. It's a much more steady rate of absorption. It can take up to 90 minutes. And in some cases, I have to say from my own personal experience, when I choose to use an oral form of administration, depending upon the particular product, I've kind of felt like it took somewhere between 2 and 3 hours sometimes to feel a full effect. But what's different about it is it's more of a body experience. It's going up very gradually and it kind of tapers off and then it comes back down. And it lasts that entire journey, I guess, if you will, of that oral form of administration, lasts between 6 to 8 hours, right? And so you might be thinking, 6 to 8 hours? Who wants to be high for 6 to 8 hours, right? So, and again, in the context of low dose applications, I don't want to be high for 6 to 8 hours. But I would like to take the edge off for 6 to 8 hours, right? I'd like to sleep more soundly for 6 to 8 hours, right? Because of this slower onset of administration, it's not going to necessarily be something that puts you to bed, right? Because it's going to take a bit to kick in. But if you were to take it a few hours before bed, and again, as a potential substitute for a sedative like Ambien, for example, I know a lot of people out there are routinely taking daily dose of Ambien, which has a very, very dramatic side effect profile. This might be an alternative for you. Now, I'm not a physician, so this is something that you need to discuss with your physician or make an informed choice about for your own personal health and wellness. But I definitely could see, because of this rate of onset, 6 to 8 hours effective rate, that it's something that's going to provide a much more gradual rate of onset, oral administration, and it's going to last much longer. So those are the key differences. If I could just summarize briefly, you've got your smoking inhalation, quicker form of onset, little less expensive, but you're going to have these sharp peaks and valleys, not as much control, not as much discretion. If you're administering your cannabis orally, you're going to be able to more tightly control the dose again, and I'm going to talk a little bit about product mix in just a little bit, but there's lots of different ways to consume cannabis from an oral administration and products where there's a defined dose. It's very discreet, and it's also something that's going to build gradually and last a while. So again, in low doses, this is a great form of administration if you want to mitigate the psychoactivity of consuming cannabis in high doses. If you're smoking or you're using a vaporizer pen, you are going to get those sharp peaks and valleys, and unless you're using a profile or an isolate that's specific to CBD, something that's not intoxicating, you are going to feel intoxicating effects just because of the way that the products are manufactured and the method of administration. There's a handful of products available in the space, especially with vaporizing pens that are low dose, but not many, and it's very, very hard to kind of figure it out because inhalation patterns vary dramatically. Concentration of the cannabinoids in the oil vary dramatically. If you're looking to control the dose and have a discrete form of administration, an oral administration is definitely the way to go.